Carrick was a sprawling town. It really could have been classed as a city if it had bothered to go through the paperwork to be classified as such. Landing in the port had been a simple affair, attesting to need necessitating efficiency. There were a couple of roughs running the port, but they were gruff yet fair. She knew if they broke any of the rules, they wouldn't be so fair then. She had Gideon and Henry to carry the trunk. It was light, but awkward. Hara had looked inside, even though there was a very complicated lock on it. She had worried it was drugs, and if that had been the case, she would have taken it back to its owner and told them to go shove it. She was amused when she found it was filled with spices. Rare and exotic and really difficult to acquire spices, but only innocuous spices. She was pretty sure they were stolen, but then so was her ship. She really couldn't be all high and mighty and moral when it came to stealing. Hara was leading the way with the notes Alice had taken from the client. She knew Carrick vaguely. She and her father had hidden out in one of the taverns here. Her father had been running away from an Empire noble whom he had conned into buying a mine which didn't exist. Seeing the place now that she was older, Hara was shocked her father had brought a child here. The streets had women of ill repute on every corner. The men swore and cursed loudly. Hara thought her father probably was oblivious to the behavior of the residents of Carrick. Hara noticed a person watching them. He looked familiar, but she had stayed here for a while and it might be someone she had known from her past. She dismissed him easily. The tavern where they were to meet the clients was at the end of the street. A quick signal to the innkeeper and they were led to a private room at the back. Gideon put the trunk down and settled on top of it. Hara said to Henry, "Head back and grab some supplies. We should be along shortly." She said the last a bit louder because the door was open already and the people they were supposed to meet had arrived. Henry ducked past the clients as they entered and returned to the airship. Their clients were the typical over-muscled men she had expected to be picking up stolen goods. She stood next to Gideon, who was inspecting his nails in an overly casual way. He would not seem like the most dangerous person in the room. One of her clients motioned to the trunk with his head and asked, "Is that what we are here for?" Hara placed her hands on her hips and said, "That depends if you brought the money." The leader didn't answer. He motioned for his men to move forward. She didn't wait. She pulled out her gun and pointed it at him. Gideon said, "Wow, that escalated fast. I really did think there would be some posturing, a few insults maybe." The other men pulled out their weapons and pointed them at the two of them. The tension was thick as people pointed guns at each other. The clients couldn't decide if she was the dangerous one or Gideon and kept changing their target. Hara didn't move and her aim was directed at the leader. Hara said, "We can all leave here without holes in our pretty flesh if you can provide us with what we are due." The leader said, "I could just kill you. And take what we want." He wasn't a very bright smuggler if he thought this was the way to do business. If he continued this way, it would be a matter of time before he was adorned with extra iron himself. Hara motioned with her gun to indicate her gun was aimed at him as she said, "But I would shoot you first. Not anyone else. Just you. Now, are you going to give the order for me to be shot and for you to die?" There was a tense silence, then the leader motioned to one of his men. They placed a small purse on the ground. Hara asked Gideon, "How much is there?" He didn't even leave his seat on top of the trunk as he said, 50 gold coins. All in brass and copper and 1 ceramic penny. Do they still use ceramic pennies here? How archaic. Hara ignored his extraneous comments. The amount was exactly what they had been promised. She didn't question how he could know how much money there was. Dragons had their own tricks. Hara said, "Pick it up, Gideon. We are leaving." Gideon hopped off the trunk and picked up the purse. He tucked it away and came to stand behind her. He asked, "Are you going to shoot him?" "Not now. But she raised an eyebrow. The leader motioned to his men and they put down their guns. She did as well. She tipped her head to the man and said, "Enjoy your loot. Come along, Gideon." They stepped out of the room. A man leaning against the wall outside said, "I was just about to come in and rescue you, baby girl." Hara frowned at the man, then realized who he was. Talon? This was who she had seen outside and thought familiar. He had been an ex-convict who had worked with her father. He was mostly a thief who broke into houses to find out things about people. He used to steal things, but he said that was too easy, so he had gone into stealing information instead. Talon moved away from the wall and approached her. He gave her a hug and kissed her cheek. She pulled away when she heard Gideon growled behind her. He was a dragon after all, and he might do something stupid like attack her old friend. Hara asked, "What are you doing here, Talon?" Talon shrugged. "Getting stuck in this two-bit town. I saw you had a ship and I thought I could bum a ride out of this place. Well, at least to a place where people aren't trying to kill me." She shook her head slightly, not at all surprised someone was trying to kill him, and said, "Talon, I don't think I can find a town this side of the world where there is no one trying to kill you." Talon rolled his eyes at her humor. "Ha ha. Well, is there space for a slightly redeemed thief?" Hara grinned. "Definitely, but you might need to man the guns if we ever get in trouble. And the rest of the crew will be your friends for life if you take a stint stoking the fires in the engine room." Gideon huffed and said, "Do we have to bring him along? You already got that clockwork nonsense." She had left Angel back on the ship, though she had to bribe the creature with a glass bauble. She smiled when she turned to Gideon and asked, "Jealous of Talon or Angel?" She didn't particularly care which. Gideon huffed again and said, "Of course I am." Hara laughed outright at that. Talon raised an eyebrow and asked, "Is this your man?" "He certainly wants to be, but we are still negotiating." "Have you got all your gear, Talon?" "I think we should leave this town as soon as possible before those men decide they want their money back." Gideon came to walk next to her. He said in a hissed whisper, "Do you trust him? At least the clockwork monster is harmless." "Yes, surprisingly. Certainly more than the rest of the crew. You do know they are all strangers." "Don't worry, Gideon, jealousy is a nasty emotion. You'll get used to it. Just breathe out slowly and it will go away." She, like Gideon, was jealous. It was a very human emotion. They were out of Carrick without any incident. Alice had stopped apologizing, so life was good. Talon had headed to his room with a saunter. Gideon approached her. He had been sulking over dinner as she and Talon had reminisced over past pranks. Talon had been careful not to mention anything about her father, so he must have heard of what her father had done to her, leaving her to serve prison time. Gideon leant on the railing next to her. Angel sat on the railing and clung on with her small claws as the wind buffeted her. She remained there with the two of them for a long while. Eventually, she turned to him and said, "I'm not going to sleep with Talon. He is like an older brother." Gideon turned to her and said, "I don't like this feeling." He reached out and stroked one of Angel's wings. She turned her head to trill at him. Hara caught his hand and tugged him closer. He stood in front of her. She studied him. He was taller than her and he was in a serious need of a good haircut. Hara reached up and moved his hair away from his face. "You didn't eat him, though. No more than you crushed Angel." Gideon shook his head. "I don't eat humans. Never did. The others didn't like that. I was so queasy about taking lives and I lived away from them." That was curious, she thought. Hara asked, "Is that why you got into an argument with that dragon in your house?"